Hi guys, I'm Neil.
Hey guys, I'm Ari.
So recently watched Paul Graham's Before the Startup lecture for Stanford. Um, Spent a lot of time thinking about when the right time to build a startup is. You know what we're doing. Obviously, we're two kids in college, um, and just wanted to kind of share our perspective. Not really anything comprehensive, but Ari, when do you think the right time to start a startup is?
Um, I was telling Nihal, I was like, I don't think we have any authority to talk about this, but I think we can talk from the perspective of why we think we're ready to, or why we decided to take a summer and build something of our own rather than go and have an internship or take classes over the summer or whatever. So, what we hear a lot and what we read on the internet a lot is that with AI, now is the best time to basically build something of your own. Before, what you needed years of experience to be able to do is now possible without having with having next to no experience. If you know how to code and you know how to harness tools that are currently available on the internet on online marketplaces, you are very well equipped to go and build something in a matter of just a few days. So the only real blocker that now exists to build some sort of software platform is having a vetted and qualified idea and being able to build something that addresses that idea and solves a problem slash real pain point for consumers. So that's kind of the approach we're taking. So, we knew that we had the technical prowess to be able to go and build something. It's now a question of what is it that we're going to build, and that's what the grind kind of encapsulates.
So I'll provide a little more context. So there's a couple of things that we heard today that kind of changed our perspective. So first of all, if you haven't seen the Before the Startup talk, it's pretty interesting. Again, we don't have any authority to talk about it, but I'll try to distill at least what basics of what I thought Paul Graham was saying. That talk was basically, um, you know, don't drop out of college, stay in college. Try to experience as much as you can. College is a great way to learn a lot, um, and you might drop out before you experience enough, and then you won't have anything to build a startup based on. You'll waste time trying to come up with startup ideas, and you'll do all this stuff that's not necessarily counterintuitive, all this shit that makes sense, and you'll end up in this negative situation where you don't really know where to go, you don't really know what to do you know with the knowledge you have, because you haven't really experienced enough to actually build something in a space. Um, so I thought that was really interesting, right? Obviously, I watched this while I'm a kid that is considering dropping out of college to build a startup full time. So that was definitely interesting to hear. Um, and I look up to Paul Graham a lot, so I almost like not internalize those words, but I really took those words to heart. And then we have a mentor here in Miami, and I was talking to him about it, and this is he boiled it down to he disagrees with Paul Graham, and one of the reasons why is because college in an ideal world is exactly that, where you spend a lot of time learning about new things, but in many cases what you're actually doing at college isn't actually very valuable. A lot of the times you're just quote unquote wasting time in classes, and doing a lot of test prep and exam preparation, which isn't necessarily going out and experiencing the world. In an ideal world, that's what college would be, right? In an ideal world, you'd be spending 4 years of your life just coming up with different problem spaces, just exploring a bunch of different industries, trying new things. But at the end of the day, that's not really what college ends up being, in some in many cases. So that was definitely an interesting perspective. So it wasn't necessarily that he was disagreeing with Paul Graham on what founders should do before they start a startup, but it was almost like he was saying um, Paul Graham's wrong because college isn't the exact way that he described it to be. What do you think about that, Ari? What do you like? What do you think about those two perspectives that I just shared?
I think college used to hold a lot of value, um, in that you needed 4 years of an education to be able to build the skills that you would need to go and start a company. Um, but again, I mentioned earlier with AI, I think now that's not necessarily the case, especially because becoming an adept programmer and technical person is very accessible. You can do it in a few weeks. You can do it in a couple of months. You can really hone those skills and supplement them with AI to build something that what you needed a long, quote unquote, like a long time ago here is very relative, but by a long time, I think just a few years ago, you needed a college education maybe to be able to develop those skills and, maybe get access to the resources that you needed to develop that skill set. I still think that college holds a lot of value and that it's a good signal, right? If you get into a prestigious school, I think that signifies something that shows a certain indication of sorts about the type of person you are. I attended a liberal arts school in Duke, um, and I think having access to that sort of interdisciplinary education has opened my eyes to a lot of different things, which kind of fuels my startup foundery brain. You meet a lot of people, a lot of high energy people, which I think is really good for, just the way your brain develops. But at the end of the day, if you want to build a startup, my philosophy is that numbers trump everything, right? So if we reach the end of the summer and we have, a certain level of revenue or a certain number of customers that we're happy with, and we see a tangible trajectory that we could follow, it makes sense to maybe put school on hold to be able to go and pursue that, because with the way that every single industry is moving so quick right now, all because of AI and because of the vast amount of innovation that's happening in the world. Um, if you wait, in our case, another 2 years to graduate school and then dive into that, or graduate school and then get a job and get some work experience and then dive into that, at that point you've missed it. And I would say we're already kind of on the tail end of that bell curve, or nearing it, because there's just so many people building so many different things.
Let's turn this way, since I want to make it clear, this is more like a conversation that me and Ari are having, like between each other. We're not saying that this is necessarily the comprehensive, way to think. Again, we have no authority or credibility to talk about this.
Yeah, it's not a lecture.
This is more like us talking about the way that we think about things, and kind of sharing our knowledge. We're using this as a way to distill what we've learned. Maybe we learned separate things. We took different meanings from the same experiences. But yeah, what do you think about what he said today about like how he would go back and get a job, but that's not necessarily, what he would recommend to people now? Or do you think that just boils down
I think
to?
I agree with that. I think a lot of older people needed a job before. Again, it's a signal, right? The same way that I just said that the school you go to is a signal of a certain degree. That's what a job used to be, right? If you worked at X company, that meant something, and having that on your resume meant something. And I think that's still the case today to a certain extent, but much less so, right? And even my school analogy is also losing relevance very quickly, right? Especially with technical people, you're seeing a lot of successful teams have kids who went to community college, didn't go to college at all, right? Kids are coming out of high school with technical skills, because at the end of the day, if you're building in tech and you're building AI centric tools, it's a very binary thing, right? You can either build it or you can't, and you don't necessarily need to go to college to be able to do those things. So I think there's still definitely value to, having experience is what matters, right? And you can get that experience in a few different ways. You can either say, hey, I did my own thing, right? Like we're doing this summer, and you get a very high level experience from that. But another approach that maybe some more risk averse people might take is say, look, I don't necessarily have what it takes to just jump into the deep end and explore the unknown, but I know that I have that desire somewhere deep down, and before I do that, I'm going to get and develop some amount of skills by, whether it's working for a larger company, working for another startup, even collecting those skills, and then being able to have the conviction that they need to go and do something of their own. I think that there are definitely a few different avenues that you can follow. And if you look at people who are in their late 20s, 30s, early 40s even, in their time, they needed to get that experience in order to build those skills. But in our time, like teenagers, young people who are in their early 20s, you do not need that experience anymore because you can gain that experience just by jumping into the deep end.
Okay, so that's a really interesting point. Another thing I took from the conversation was that he one of the reasons why he said he wanted a job was not only because yeah it provides some credibility, it provided some like some useful life skills, but the other reason was because there are certain things to be learned from a larger organization, and just maybe even a larger company. It even could be that you learn stuff about their problem space, and that could be something to explore. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was touching upon was like you'll see a lot of successful founders who are like let's call it like 5 to 10 years into their journeys, and they're building something in a space that they discovered by working for someone else, working for a larger corporation. And that's a very valid way to do that, and I think that gives again that's a signal, that's a sign of credibility. If you go and you work at Goldman Sachs for 3 years and you say, I've figured out everything that's wrong with, or everything that's inefficient with investment banking due diligence, right? And then you're going and building a tool to solve that. Number one, you're very well plugged into who your potential customer base is going to be because you were in their shoes just a very short time ago. And that will, of course, help you get your foot in the door with potential people to sell to. But number two, that just makes you a magnitude of a degree more qualified to actually go and build that tool because you've lived the experience and you're building a tool that you yourself in the past would have used and benefited from.
Okay, so there was a lot there. So to distill that, what would you say were the key values of getting a job? Because you mentioned a couple earlier, and then there were also
experience, signal, and culture.
Okay, interesting. All right. But what would you say? Okay, so then all of those things are valuable about getting a job and exploring a space, right? Obviously, we're exploring GovCon right now. One of the reasons why we dove into that space was because not obviously, we had some connections from our internal, like personal connections, but also because I had some experience in there as well. What is the argument for going the other way around and not waiting to get a job or going directly, going into industry before building a startup?
You don't need that experience anymore. You can, like, it's the classic kind of YC approach, right? Which is interview as many people as you can and get very intimate with potential customers and potential users and potential people who face a problem. And once you identify what that problem is after talking to hundreds of people, odds are that you've become intelligent enough to kind of stay dangerous with those people and build something that services their needs, right? So I don't need to know, in government contracting, for example, I don't need to know everything about the entire pipeline from the top of the funnel to the end of execution of a contract. But if I'm talking to 100 different growth professionals at the top of the funnel and I'm learning about their problems, after 100 conversations, I will be decently competent in what a growth professional does. I will know what their day-to-day looks like. I will know what problems they face. I will know what their workflow is like. And that gives me a certain level of credibility because I have now done quote-unquote due diligence in the space and I know what it takes to build something. And yes, with a job, you might argue that, hey, it's more impactful to actually be a growth professional and live that life and then build something. But if you're on like a time crunch, as we kind of are and most founders are, right, where you want to build something and you just want to really dive deep into a certain space for a couple of weeks to qualify it as a potential space to build a product in, just talking to as many people as you can, testing them, learning about their problems is an adequate substitute for that. And I think that in today's day and age, that's very doable.
Okay, this is super sick. We're gonna try to keep these videos short from now on. So,
how long was that?
We'll try to cut it. But I'll have to see the exact length. But
20
yeah,
minutes?
less.